guys, so let's get started with today. Another new session for us. We are covering the rest of France today. So we're just gonna touch a little bit still on Bordeaux, as we only covered the main two grape varieties last time. But this time we're gonna talk about a little bit about the other red grape varieties. I'm not gonna talk much about or at all about the white wines of Bordeaux, because we mentioned them the other day, and unfortunately they are not as important, I guess, as we wish they would be. So we're not going to focus that much on that. Okay, so let's get started. So the plan today, again, as usual, we're going to do the recap. I've already got a volunteer for a change, because otherwise you guys never volunteer. So Elena's going to do that in a minute. We're going to talk about Phylloxera, which you need to know about. Very important thing, affected the world of wine immensely, but we haven't spoken about it at all. So then the Bordeaux, like I said, we're going to talk about Rhone Valley, Alsace, the other regions of France, and lastly we're going to cover Loire Valley. There's a reason for that. Don't worry, I'll explain it when we get there. All right, so Elena, let's start with the recap. What did we do last time?
So good morning, everyone, first of all.
Good morning.
And we spoke last time about, we started to talk about the history of Bordeaux. So we said that 3,000 years ago, we could find Romans there. And this was a very good influence for the city. And because it was a city that geography was really potentially, because it was between two rivers. So we've got, for this reason, two different banks, left banks and right banks. For the gravel and the clay that was there, that they have two different way to match with water. That one is showered and one is bath. So we later started to speak about the grapes, Cabernet Sauvignon, that is the son of the Cabernet Franc and the Sauvignon Blanc. And we spoke about their capacity of the potential aging, and that is medium body, medium tannin, and medium alcohol. And the same, it's quite the same Merlot, but in terms of taste, we've got pyrazines inside, so we're gonna find a little bit of vegetable flavor, because when they pick the grapes, they pick just a little before they gonna be matured 100%. Is that all right?
Okay, so almost perfect. A couple of tiny things to be clear. So you said that about the pyrazines right now. So they don't pick early. It's just that because of the climate, they don't ripen fully.
Okay.
So they pick when they're supposed to, because they cannot do it any later. But because the climate is relatively cool, you do get this under ripeness that kind of showcases in this. But yeah, very good in terms of recap. You have another task right now, Elena, and that is go through the participants and nominate who's going to do it on Tuesday.
Me?
You need to nominate somebody, yeah.
Okay.
I think we'll do it like this, because otherwise nobody volunteers.
Yeah. Perfect. Of course, we spoke also about the classifications and premiums wine that Bordeaux have.
Do you know the five first growths? Do you remember them?
Bordeaux Superior, Bordeaux Blanc, Cremant de Bordeaux, Bordeaux.
The actual wines, the actual wineries, the top 5 chateaux on the left bank of Bordeaux. Do you remember them?
Some of them.
Okay. Try to name as many as you can.
Okay. The first growth is Chateau Haut, Briand.
Haut-Briand, yeah.
Haut-Briand, Panté, Conten.
Panté, Connet, but
yeah.
That's not a first growth. It's a 5th growth, but it makes really, really good wines.
Okay. And Chateau.
Do you remember which was the one that was promoted to the top ones?
No, unfortunately, I don't remember.
Anybody else?
The Rothschild.
Rothschild.
Which Rothschild?
The Mouton Rothschild.
Mouton, yeah. What's the other Rothschild?
Lafite. No.
Yeah, Lafite. Very good.
Okay.
Okay. I've tried to do some research about the Cheval Blanc you were asking about. So there's no definitive answer anywhere. Kevin tried as well.
I've tried, but impossible, mate. I even asked what's his name.
Yeah, there's no real information. It is highly possible that it is something to do with Napoleon. I mean, they will generally look at history, but yeah, there's no. If I get a chance, I was supposed to actually go to Cheval Blanc in April, beginning of April, but obviously because of this shithole.
Well, you can take us all, no? We can go all together.
Yeah. But yeah, hopefully I'll get there one day and I'll ask them directly. Maybe then.
Well, Ari is checking with them directly, so I'll see.
All right. Cool. Elena, who are you nominating?
Let me see here who we have.
Come on, just nominate the loud guy. I want you to nominate him.
But who is the loud guy?
Come on.
Marco.
Oh, Kevin, shut up, you.
There we go. Kevin volunteered. There we go. Kevin, you've got recap.
Okay, Kevin.
All right.
Oh, wow.
Okay, guys. So
I won't be here on Monday. On Monday, though.
That's fine. I'm sure.
Actually, Tuesday. Good morning.
All right, guys. So let's get started with today's session. So the first thing I want to talk
about. Just before, you have such a beautiful haircut, Lenart.
Thank
you.
You.
Have to mention.
Yeah, in case they call me into the army. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about today is Phylloxera. So Phylloxera, so let's understand why this is important first. So in terms of wine making, we are using, so there are different types of vine species in the world. So same as like there's different types of mammals, there's, different types of tigers and lions and whatever. There are different types of species in terms of vine as well. The main one that we use for winemaking is a species called Vitis vinifera. So Vitis meaning vine, and then vinifera, it's a Latin name that basically describes the species that we use. So kind of 95% of all wine, that even more than that, that is produced comes from vines like this. Now there are others as well in the Vitis family. Some of the most famous ones, well, one of the most famous ones will be Vitis lambrusca, and I'll explain in a moment why that's important. So in 1850s, a lot of researchers were traveling between USA and between Europe because they've invented steam. So there was a lot of steamboat ships that were kind of making the journey, and it was quite relatively fast to get across the Atlantic, whereas in the past when you had to sail, that trip could take forever. So as they did this, they started bringing over certain things with them, obviously for research. One of the things was this little bacteria called Phylloxera. So what is Phylloxera? Phylloxera is basically a louse. It's a little kind of bug that feeds on roots of the vines. And this was a big problem because it basically wiped out pretty much all of Europe's vineyards. So all of Europe lost vineyards because of this little disease. It looks a little bit like this in the picture. So these are tiny little disgusting things, and this is a root. So they're micro sized. So when they brought them over from America, Americans didn't use Vitis vinifera. They were using Vitis lambrusca and other species, and these species were had a defense against this little tiny thing. So they weren't a problem there. But in Europe, Vitis vinifera didn't have any kind of defenses against this. So this was like another thing that we are finding ourselves in. It was basically a disease that kind of spread all over the place. There was no way of stopping it. So they finally realized how they're going to stop it, and it was a relatively simple solution. And it was basically they started grafting Vitis vinifera vines onto the American rootstock that wasn't affected by this. So what that means is most of our vineyards aren't on their own roots. They are on roots of something completely different, which means that wines are not, they're very close to what they're supposed to be, but they're not exactly what they're supposed to be. A pure Cabernet Sauvignon on its own roots would generally taste a lot differently to what it does when it's grafted. But this was the only way to stop the thing. Well, not stop it, but basically just protect yourself from it. So Phylloxera still exists today. So even today, you cannot let's plant Vitis vinifera vines and expect that everything is going to be fine. It can hit anywhere very, very quickly. And as soon as it's in your vineyard, there is nothing you can do about it. You need to chop down, you need to take everything out. So very, very serious thing. So 40% of French grapes were gone. Probably even more, but this is obviously in the 1850s. They didn't have much more information than this. France was most badly affected, but other regions got hit as well. There were a few tiny little exceptions that did survive, and they still are grafted on their own Vitis vinifera wines. And these are generally wines that are found in two types of soil. One of them is sand and the other one is slate. So sand, as you can guess, basically on beaches, there's a very famous village on the coast of Portugal called Colares, and they're famous for the vines are literally on a beach, and they are original vines. There's no kind of there's no grafting going on there, and the reason for this is because these little buggers, they can't move around in sand. They need something relatively firm to move around on, and sand is kind of like, it's like quicksand. It just kind of swallows them all up. So they can't survive them, they can't procreate there. The other one is slate, which is most commonly found soil in Mosel in Germany. So a lot of German Riesling are still non-Phylloxera Riesling. Okay, so I will relate to this Phylloxera as we go along today. That's why I wanted to get it out of the way in the beginning, just so we get it. Okay, does this make sense? Do you know what this is then? Yeah. Okay, so basically what you need to know, a disease kills vineyards, no cure for it other than protecting it with growing on a different vitis root. Okay? Okay, so now let's talk about the supplemental varieties of Bordeaux. So we've mentioned Cabernet Franc, mainly as the daddy of both of Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. That we talked about before, and I kind of said the other day that it's not considered a noble grape variety, which is true and not true. It is a noble variety. It is a very interesting variety. It's a very important variety, but most of the wines in Bordeaux will still be planted blended with Cabernet and Merlot primarily. Okay, so all of these grapes that I'm going to be talking about now are blending partners. They're not the basis of anything. So Cabernet Franc, very, very important grape, generally has a lot of like these blue fruits, a lot of freshness. And as we mentioned with the other two, within its family, it has this issue with the pyrazines. So Cabernet Franc doesn't actually come from Bordeaux. It comes from Loire Valley, where you will actually find it a lot of the time as a 100% varietal. But they did plant a lot of it in Bordeaux, like I said, for blending purposes. The other quite important grape is Petit Verdot. In French, kind of a loose translation would be a small glass of water. This is where the name came from. And it basically meant that it had very tiny berries. It didn't produce a lot of juice. So when you kind of, if you tried to squeeze the grape, you didn't even get a full glass out of it. So that's where I got the name from. Very, very small production. Think about 2 or 3% of it planted in all of Bordeaux. So not a lot, but I'll explain why it's important and why it's a good grape to have. Carbonare, most famous these days for being grown in Chile. But it is actually one of the most important blending partners as well in Bordeaux. A lot of people stopped using it in their top wines. They mostly use it for like their second wines or third wines or so on. But the one winery that I mentioned the other day, Clerc Milon, uses a very high proportion of it, and they still make amazing wine. So it is possible to make really, really good wines with Carbonare. Malbec. So remember Phylloxera? I was just talking about it. So Malbec used to be the most planted grape variety in France. Not just in France, even in other countries, you would find a lot of plantings of Malbec. But when Phylloxera hit and it wiped out the vineyards, it kind of gave people a chance to reset and to rethink what they're going to do next. And Malbec, as the name would suggest, mal meaning bad, and bec is kind of like a beak, like a nose, meaning it has a bad nose, bad flavor, bad smell to it. That's where it got the name from. And it does, Malbec has this very weird note to it in France. So when they had this chance to reset, they were looking at Malbec and they said, if we can do anything else, why don't we? And they stopped growing Malbec massively, and they instead planted Cabernet Merlot and Cabernet Franc and everything else basically. And Malbec massively dropped in quantity. But anyway, so these are the original 6 varieties that were used in Bordeaux. So these 4 plus the 2 we talked about the other day. But last year, due to climate change, they're thinking ahead, and they've added some more allowed grape varieties. So what I mean by allowed, and I've mentioned this a few times, allowed means that you are allowed to use the appellation name if you use these grapes. So technically, you can grow Pinot Noir in Bordeaux. You just cannot call the wine Bordeaux. That makes sense? So you can grow Cabernet Sauvignon in Burgundy, but you can't call it a Burgundy. If you want to call it a Burgundy, it has to be one of the grapes that is allowed there. Okay, so what they've added was, the most important one was Touriga Nacional, which is kind of the most serious of the 4 grapes that are allowed. It is a grape more famously grown in Portugal. A lot of port wines, Douro wines are made with that grape. It's kind of a very deep, very tannic wine. And it's probably going to work really, really well in Bordeaux. So like I said, they're preparing for climate change. They're preparing that their wines might not make it for a very long time. So they've started to allow planting of these grapes, so you can now make wines with this. I don't think anybody's done it yet, but surely somebody will sooner or later. The other grapes are Marcelon, which is an artificial cross between Cabernet Sauvignon and Grenache. So the 2 grapes are quite interesting. Cabernet, rich, powerful, tannic. Grenache, kind of juicy. So you end up with Marcelon, which is kind of like a medium-bodied wine. It originates in southern France, in kind of like Provence, Languedoc area. And yeah, it's generally used there just to make like normal drinking wine. It's not necessarily an impressive grape variety. I think the idea for Marcelon is to kind of replace Carbonare as a blending partner going forward. I don't think Touriga Nacional might be one of the main grapes, but Marcelon is probably going to be there more for the softness and the juiciness. You've got Castex, very local, very native variety. Don't bother remembering it. I don't think people will use it. It's actually on decline, so I don't understand why they've actually added it on. But let's see, maybe they know what they're doing. And the last one is Arenaroa, which is a cross between Tannat and Cabernet Sauvignon. So a very rich, very tannic type of grape. Okay, now let's talk about the blending. So Bordeaux is famous for their blends. So where Burgundy we talked about, it's 100% varietals. The wine needs to be a varietal. There's no blending allowed whatsoever. Bordeaux has a very different thinking of it. So they're thinking they're thinking about teamwork, more about individual sports. So where Burgundy is all about golf, Bordeaux is about football. Okay, so they are looking for somebody to be a goalkeeper, somebody a midfielder, somebody a striker, and so on. So they do this by blending these grapes. So a Merlot, for example, will add softness. They will add some kind of more of a rounder style of wine. It will add a little bit of red and blue fruit aromas to the blend. Cabernet will add structure, tannins, a lot of black fruit. And then Cabernet Franc will add the freshness. So basically, it's on you as a winemaker to decide what you want out of your wine. So for example, you want a a structured, rich tannic wine with a little bit of freshness, you will do Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc blend, right? If you want something a little bit softer, you will add a bit of Merlot and so on and so forth. Okay, Petit Verdot generally adds quite a bit of finish, so it just kind of adds a little bit of a mid palate. I like to compare blending to music as well, where, for example, if the main grape Cabernet Sauvignon is the vocals, then Cabernet Franc would be kind of like the drums, the hi-hats, the things like that. Petit Verdot is kind of the strings. It's kind of that middle harmony that just kind of ties everything together and just makes it, I don't know, a little bit smoother, I guess, and it just kind of extends it all. Malbec will add the attack, so it kind of adds that beginning aroma. It adds that when you smell the wine, it kind of jumps out at you. So it just adds a little bit of a bouquet, I guess, to the wine. And then lastly, Carbonare just kind of polishes everything. Again, it's like glue, just connects everything together. Carbonare is, like I said, very, very used in very, very small proportions these days. So, but still, an important grape. It does the trick. It is an important part of the team. Without it, you cannot win. Okay. So that's it for Bordeaux. Do you guys have any questions about Bordeaux in general? Anything you wish I mentioned and I haven't yet? Anything whatsoever? No. Okay.
I have one question. Sorry.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned, sorry, back to the Phylloxera, that say 40% of the grapes were wiped out. But so the ones that weren't wiped out, like the ones that grow in the slate and the sand, is there any indication on any labels that they are this, just the original grafted, the original non-grafted stem, or is it just if you know, you know?
So I'm sorry, I don't think I got the question. So is it an indicator? How do we know that they're grafted or what?
Yeah, so the ones that survived the Phylloxera, so the ones that are now in sort of sand or slate sort of ground, is there any kind of indication on a label or anything to say that these are the original vines?
Good question. I got it. Yeah. No, generally there won't be any particular classification or anything like that. It's all, again, down to research. So people will tell the story. They might put it on the label as in, you know, in the back when they talk about the wines or winery or whatever, because people generally are proud of this, but there is no markings or anything. There is no way to know for sure.
Okay.
Again, that's wine. It's this is always the answer. There's no way to know for sure. It's a very silly answer, but that's what it is. It's ultimately a farming thing. They're farmers, winemakers, so they're not really interested in consumers. That's the marketing people that try to convince them to put things on there. So yeah, sorry.
All right, thanks.
No worries. All right, moving on. So next important region in France is Rhone Valley. Personally, one of my favorite regions in France because there is a heavy content of a grape called Syrah there, or Shiraz as they know it in the New World. Very, very beautiful grape, and we'll cover it a little bit in this part. So first thing to understand is we have two major regions in the Northern Rhone. So if you look at the map on here, you've got Northern Rhone at the top, you've got the Southern Rhone at the south. So basically, on the north of this, you've got the city of Lyon, and at the south, you've got the city of Avignon, and these are the two main kind of centers of the region. So this is in the south of France, as you can see on this image here, very, very close to the Mediterranean Sea. What this means is because it's close to the Mediterranean Sea, you get a lot of that influence in. So especially the Southern Rhone bit, because it's all flatlands, gets a lot of wind. And this means that there's a lot of, they have to shield their vines quite a bit, and the wines tend to be, in spite of quite an enormous heat, because it is south of France, obviously it is hot there, the wines still have some freshness because of this wind. The wind is called Mistral as well. Northern Rhone is a little bit different because it's all on the slopes, all on the hills, and it's all next to the river of Rhone itself. So you get, so it's like a little valley. And again, you've got those winds just kind of running through. And generally, Northern Rhone wines will be a lot fresher, a lot more polished, a lot more fine than the wines that you will find in Southern Rhone. So even if there was a wine made from the same grape in those two different parts, it will be a very, very different style. So Southern Rhone, much riper, much fuller, much bigger styles, whereas Northern Rhone, a little bit more elegant in that respect. Okay, so the two main regions that kind of give the name to Southern Rhone are Châteauneuf-du-Pape and Côte de Rhône. So Côte de Rhône basically means that the wine is, it's a regional appellation, basically means the wine is pretty much anywhere from around this area. Whereas Châteauneuf-du-Pape is this very, very tiny area here. And it was, Châteauneuf-du-Pape was kind of the first area that brought Rhone Valley to the fore, that basically they're the reason why Rhone is considered a relatively respected area these days. The name comes from Châteauneuf-du-Pape, means the new chateau, the new castle of the Pope. And it was in 1300s, I think. There was Pope Clement V that moved the papacy from Bordeaux, and he moved it to Avignon. And the reason he did that, because he was old and he wanted to be on the warmer end of France. But he also liked the wines that come from him. So when he moved the papacy, a lot of emphasis was put on viticulture and winemaking in the area. So they kind of really, really improved the quality of the wines here. Châteauneuf-du-Pape is famous for reds. However, they do make whites as well. Per law, you can do 14 different grape varieties. You can blend 14 different grape varieties into making a Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So you can blend red and white as well if you wanted to do that. Not a lot of people will, but it can happen. The main grapes, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre for reds, and then for whites you will have Roussanne, Marsanne, well, not that much Roussanne, Viognier, Claret, there's a few other ones as well, Picpoul here as well. But yeah, interesting wines. The whites are generally quite meaty, quite rich, quite powerful. They can be compared to Burgundy at times, although they sometimes lack a little bit of finesse. So like I said, a warmer region, just a little bit more brut wines as opposed to the very elegant, very fresh styles you might find in Burgundy. The reds, like I said, big, powerful, rich, super serious wine. I hope you've had Châteauneuf-du-Pape before.
Sorry, which was the white grape again?
So you've got Viognier, you've got Grenache Blanc, you've got Picpoul, you've got Claret, you've got there's loads, mate. I can't remember all of them. Have a look again. I think it's 14 or 15 different grape varieties that are allowed to be made here. Okay. All right, moving on to Northern Rhone. So Northern Rhone is this part up here, and two of the main sub-appellations, I should have mentioned three actually, but two of the main ones are Hermitage, so the hill of Hermitage, which is this tiny little bit here, the red little spot that you can see, and Côte Rôtie. So Côte Rôtie basically means a roasted mountain. It's because it is a very it has a lot of sun exposure, so the fruits tend to be quite hot, quite juicy. So this is where the name comes from. Hermitage, on the other hand, has a very interesting story as it's how it got its name. So first of all, Hermitage was one of the first vineyards planted in France. It was there even before the Romans came. It was around 600 BC that the Greeks planted the first vines. And it was always famous for very, very good wines, even back then. Now, the way it got the name was in the early 1200s, there was a, what's it called? Can't remember. Basically, when they were trying to eradicate one of the religions in the south of France. What's it called? I lost my English word for it. Anyway, so there was this night. Sorry.
Crusades.
Crusades. Yes, thank you. That's what I'm. See, I'm losing my language. Anyway, so there were the Crusades. They were trying to eradicate one of the religions in the south of France. And once that was over, there was this knight that got injured in the war. He was kind of a hero, won a few very important battles for them. And the queen allowed him to kind of lick his wounds in a chapel on top of the hill of Hermitage. And this guy liked it so much up there that he basically lived out his life as a hermit. So a hermit is a person that kind of lives in solitude, no contact with the world whatsoever. So he kind of started cultivating really, really serious grapes. He started cultivating Syrah at that time. And that's how the village got its, not the village, the hill got its name, Hermitage, as in the hermit that was the knight. So like I said, he was the guy that cultivated it. Even these days, the vineyard right next to the chapel is owned, it's a monopole owned by Paul Jaboulet. The wine is called La Chapelle. It's one of the best wines ever made. So the reason why Hermitage and Côte-Rôtie are so important is because so in Southern Rhone, you have all of these different grape varieties. In the Northern Rhone, you only have Syrah. There is no other grape variety allowed. So Syrah is it's a very, very impressive wine. It is actually so impressive that before the 17th century, Bordeaux people took wine from Hermitage and they blended it into their Bordeaux. So one of the most famous ones to do this was Château Lafite, Rochelle, that we talked about. So they would blend up to 15% of Syrah into a Bordeaux. The reason why they did this is just because they needed some more elegance and they needed some more structure. So they didn't know at that time how to really deal with bad vintages. So they imported wine, I guess, from other regions to just kind of supplement that. Obviously, these days that doesn't happen anymore because they don't need to, but it did happen in the past. Anyway, so Syrah, the main grape, you do have, so this is where Northern Rhone gets a little bit complicated. So you've got a few different subregions here. You've got Saint-Joseph, you've got Crozes-Hermitage, you've got Saint-Péray, you've got Cornas, Condrieu. And so Condrieu is an all-white appellation. They make wines out of Viognier. Côte-Rôtie is an all-red appellation. However, you are allowed to blend, and they do this a lot, you are allowed to blend in a little bit of Viognier. So Viognier being a white grape, they add it to the red Syrah just to add a little bit of freshness, a little bit of like a floral character to it. It's quite a unique thing. Not a lot of people will do this, but Côte-Rôtie is very, very famous for this. Saint-Joseph, mostly famous for the reds. Cornas, reds. Saint-Péray can be whites, reds, and even sparkling wine. Crozes-Hermitage, whites and reds. And Hermitage is also white. So in terms of white, the more north you go, more Viognier you find. The more south you go, more Roussanne and Marsan. Two very interesting grape varieties as well. Okay, enough about these two. Let's just talk about the grapes really quickly. So the reason why, so I wrote it Shiraz. I should have written Syrah, I know, especially because it's in France. Kind of just slipped my mind, so I didn't double check. Anyway, Syrah, it is a beautiful grape, famous for its very, very dark, black fruited aromas, a lot of blackberries, black cherries, black currants. But it also has this very, very special Mediterranean spice aroma that just kind of distinguishes it from anything else on the planet. It tastes like oregano and rosemary and all of these beautiful little spices. You get a little bit of like an olive tapenade sometimes, a little bit of like a smoked meat. So it's a really, really complex wine. As it ages, all of those black fruits, they kind of convert and they soften up and they turn more into red fruits. So it's a really impressive wine. Very, very hard to find these days. For some reason, but yeah, beautiful stuff. If you get a chance to drink proper Northern Rhone Syrah, that's a really, really cool thing. Grenache, that's the main grape for Southern Rhone. The main reason why it's the main grape is because it's very juicy. It produces a lot of volume. So they tend to use a lot of that to produce a lot of wine. So most of the time, 50% of the blend will be a Grenache. And then they just kind of add a little bit of Syrah to it to add that polishness, that finesse, that structure. They will add a little bit of Mourvedre, which is another grape that adds a little bit of like a structure and tannic flavor, a bit more black fruit as well. And then the other grapes will just kind of be there to, similar to Bordeaux, to add certain bits to the blend. Okay. And in terms of white, kind of the main one is Viognier. So Viognier has got a bit of a bad rep in the last years because it became famous in like the Languedoc region, and they were producing a lot of very, very cheap Viognier. But Viognier actually thrives in Rhone Valley. You can get some pretty impressive wines here. Viognier has a very big problem though. It is relatively low in acidity, which isn't a good thing when you're thinking about wine and food pairing. You want that acidity to kind of just mesh better with the wine. But yeah, if you're looking for top quality Viognier, some of the best stuff comes from Northern Rhone, namely Condrieu, and there's a tiny little appellation here called Châteaubriand, and that is actually a very interesting appellation because it's only one winery has an appellation. It's a rarity. This doesn't really happen that one winery will have its own appellation. But Châteaubriand is just so spectacular. It's kind of like these very steep terraced vineyards right next to the river, and it just produces some of the most amazing wines on the planet. They even did here at M actually not too long ago. They did a blind tasting of top vineyards from the best producers in Condrieu and Châteaubriand, and they did it blind, and they could tell Châteaubriand out of all of them straight away. It just stood out. It has its own special, unique character. That's why it got its own appellation. Okay. Some of the iconic producers, Jean-Louis Chave is probably the most important one. He's kind of like a, you'll see me talk about, when I talk about single producers or small growers or things like that, they're always some kind of troublemakers. They're also always some kind of guys that they don't listen to reason, I guess, or they don't like conformity, and they just do what they think is best for the wine. So they listen to the wines, they sometimes ignore appellation rules and something like that. And Chave is kind of famous for that. He just makes spectacular wines. And if you watch those movies that I wrote in the chat, I think they mention him quite a bit there as well. There you guys, Chapoutier, Jaboulet, Rostang, all Northern Rhone, very impressive guys. Beaucastel, Raes, and Henri Bonneau are famous for Châteauneuf de Paps, and Villard is famous for Condrieu. Anyway, this is more for you guys afterwards when you look at the materials, and you can do a little bit of research on them or have a look at just what the bottles look like or what the prices are, so you see what I'm talking about. But yeah, Chave, for example, sells for about £1,000 a bottle for his Hermitage. Okay, that's Rhone Valley. Any questions on this? Anything you want me to elaborate on? Okie dokie. So let's move on to the next region, which is Alsace. Now, Alsace is in the north eastern corner of the country, so it's close to the border with Germany. And Alsace is one of the most interesting histories, not just in terms of wine, but in terms of everything. So it used to be ruled by the Prussians when there was still the Prussian Empire, and then they gave it to the Germans when the Prussian country or what was it, I don't know what it was, when they fell apart. So the Germans owned Alsace for quite a while, and then they had to give it to the French between the two world wars. And then obviously during the Second World War, the Germans occupied Alsace again. So it was again in German hands. And then after the World War, because the Germans lost, they had to give it back to France. Now what this means for Alsace is that it's a very varied culturally region. So even if you look at the photo over there, you can see it looks kind of French, but it also looks a little bit German. It's quite unique. It doesn't really have you can't really compare it to anything else. It's a very unique character. And this is what kind of relates to wines as well. So if you think about the French as being the elegant, the more romantic type of people, and that's the style they make their wines with. But on the other hand, you have the precision, the strictness of the Germans, which results in some really, really interesting, really, really spectacular wines. So you get both the finesse and you get the kind of seriousness about them. They're famous for their 4 noble grape varieties, which are Riesling, Pinot Gris, Gewürztraminer, and Muscat. Now, what they all have in common is they're all very, very aromatic grape varieties. They're also all white. So Alsace is mostly famous for the white wines. So these 4 grape varieties, there's others as well that you can grow, but these are the 4 noble ones. They are all, like I said, very aromatic, but they're all very, very different as well. So Riesling will have high acidity. It will have a lot of like stone fruit aromas, where Pinot Gris is a little bit softer, a little bit lower in acidity, similar to Gewürztraminer. And then Muscat, very grapey flavor to it. So very, very different grape varieties here, but all, like I said, very aromatic, very, very interesting styles of wine. They're also famous for Crémant d'Alsace. So Crémant, what is Crémant? Talked about this.
Okay.
Yeah, so traditional method of sparkling wine. So Chardonnay is not allowed to be grown in Alsace unless you make Crémant. So you are not allowed to bottle Chardonnay and call it Alsace, but you can grow Chardonnay and have Crémant d'Alsace from it. So it's a very unique thing again. They do make some really, really good reds as well, mostly out of Pinot Noir, or I think only out of Pinot Noir. And it has this very interesting graphite note to it. So Alsace Pinot is something that I've really not found anywhere else. I think it's quite spectacular as well. If I get a chance, I always use it to stifle the wine people that think they know everything. This is a good wine to kind of knock them off their stride, because nobody thinks of Alsace as a red wine region, but some really good stuff and really good value as well. The Pinot Noir in Burgundy is super expensive, but Pinot Noir from Alsace, if you find it, which is quite hard, is really, really good value there as well. Some of the icons from Alsace are in Trimbach. So they are, they make some of the best Rieslings on the planet. Very rich, very full-bodied style of Riesling, but still that elegance and freshness that you get just from the approach that they do. Hugel, also important, and Zin Hobrecht. So if you ever see any of these 3 on a wine list, those are the ones to go for. Okay. Any questions about Alsace? Okay. So other French wine regions, one of the big ones is Languedoc-Roussillon. Unfortunately, mostly famous for their bulk wines. They do a lot of really, really cheap stuff, a lot of house wines. They will focus on high-yielding grape varieties like Carignan, Grenache, and grapes like that. That being said, in the mountains, because Languedoc-Roussillon is a massive region. It's in the south of France, so it ranges from the coast, so from like Rhone Valley to Spain, all around the coast, and quite deep inland. So in the mountains, you get some super serious, super premium stuff as well. You even have a very important sparkling wine appellation. Limoux makes an outstanding traditional method sparkling wine there. So while yes, they're famous for bulk wines, you can find some seriously good quality there as well. You just need to kind of do a bit of research. Provence, obviously famous for their rosés. There's a sub-region in Provence called Bandol that kind of makes the most premium, the most high quality styles of wine. They also make spectacular red wines, some white as well, but there's some spectacular red wines made from mainly Mourvedre, which is really quite unique. They're very, very tannic, but soft at the same time. There's got a lot of again, olivey and black fruity character. It's kind of like a Syrah, just missing a little bit of that red fruit that you would get with Syrah with a little bit of age. Southwest France, it's an actual region. They call it Southwest France, and it kind of covers the southwest of France. So kind of south of Bordeaux and a little bit more inland. You get a few tiny little regions there. There's Jurançon de Cahors. Cahors is the famous region for Malbec, where it's still the main grape. There's a few other. These wines are generally made for local consumption, so there's not much of it that is exported. The exception might be the sweet wines from Jurançon that kind of have a serious name to them. But other than that, most of these wines will generally be kind of drunk at home. One of the fun ones is Jura. So Jura it's got a lot of native grape varieties. There's a bit of Chardonnay there as well. But they're by far the most famous wine is a wine called Vin Jaune. Have you guys ever heard of Vin Jaune? So in French, Vin Jaune means yellow wine. And it is basically a wine that's been kind of aged on a bed of yeast. So similar to sherry. I don't know if you know how sherry is made, but basically what it does. So when you put wine in a barrel, with time, because it's alcohol, obviously, it starts to evaporate. So everybody else will top up these wines. So you will have one barrel and you will just kind of use it to top up all of the other barrels. So they're always filled to the top, because if it's filled to the top, the evaporation is much slower, which means you don't lose that much wine in the end. With Vin Jaune, they don't top up. So basically the wine just keeps dropping. You end up with, you lose about 40% of the wine at the end of this process. And as there's more air in there, the yeast kind of forms like a crust on top of the wines. And this adds some really interesting, really nutty, oxidative aromas to the wine. It is a delicacy, definitely a delicacy. This is not your everyday wine. This is not something you're gonna have on your balcony. You need to know what you're buying. It's aged for exactly 6 years and 3 months before release. That's a very special thing about them as well. And generally, you're going to pair it with some serious cheeses like the Comté that comes from the area around. And it comes in bottles like this. It's always like this, a tiny bottle with a very weird shape. And it will say Vin Jaune on it. So if you ever read Vin Jaune, tread lightly, tread carefully. Very interesting wines. You've also got Savoie, which is kind of that region next to Switzerland and in the mountains. Most of the wines there used to go to the ski chalets because just it was local. So it was easy to sell that. That was their market. But they have started to kind of get a little bit of recognition as well elsewhere. You won't find much of it though. Oops. Lastly, you have Corsica as well, the island, famous for their whites. There's Pimentino, and there's a lot of local grape varieties as well that they make. Wines have this very interesting, the Fermentinos at least that I've had, have a very interesting, like a piney flavor to it. They almost taste like the pine trees that you see, that you smell on the beach. So really interesting wines. Very, very fresh as well. So something you might want to consider if you ever get a chance to see Corsican wine, which again, it's very rare, very hard to find. Okay, anything I've skipped? All right. Now, I saved Loire Valley for the end. So Loire Valley is a little bit more complicated. It's quite a big region. It kind of runs from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the center, almost to the eastern part of France, and then it turns down kind of towards Burgundy. So it's a very big region, and basically means anything around the Loire River, which runs through France. It's divided into 4 different sectors. We're going to talk about some of the most famous appellations. So Muscari is one of the most famous ones. So this one comes around the city of Nantes, which is kind of almost on the coast, or it is on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. And they make kind of very interesting wines from a grape called Melon de Bourgogne. Sometimes they will call the grape Muscadet as well, which is not really correct, but because it's got such a strong brand name, it kind of stuck. Muscadet is a neutral grape variety. It practically has no flavor whatsoever. So what they do is they let it age on the lees. So similar to what they do in Champagne, the lees are those dead yeast cells. they basically let Muscari or Melon de Bourgogne sit on these lees to add that yeasty flavor to the wine. And this will be marked on the bottles. The bottles will say Muscari sur lis, so on the lees. And yeah, it just gives flavor to the wine. It is a spectacular pairing, mostly for seafood, because it has high acidity and, like I said, not too much flavor. So if you pair it with seafood, seafood will bring out some more flavor of this out of this wine. So it's quite an interesting. It also has this kind of a salty character, which makes it perfect for obviously salty seafood. Oysters are perfect with Muscadet, for example. All right, second kind of very important grape is Chenin Blanc. These days it's mostly famous in South Africa, but it is Loire Valley where it originates from, and this is where you get the classy examples, the elegant, the really good stuff. The main regions are Vouvray, Savagnier, Anjou Blanc. There's others, of course, but these are kind of the main ones. Vouvray is famous for making it in different styles. So in Vouvray, you can get a sweet one or a dry one. This will generally be indicated on the bottle. It will say sec or demi-sec on the bottle. But yeah, some really juicy Chenin here. Chenin has a very interesting wool character. It tastes like sheep's wool. So that kind of doesn't sound that great, but actually in a wine, it's really good. It has this kind of a pear drop aroma as well. So really interesting grape. Savagnier, in my mind, makes the best quality. Cabernet Franc, we mentioned it with Bordeaux, but like I said, it actually originates from Loire Valley from here. The most famous regions are Anjou, Chinon, and Bourgogne. Now, remember we talked about the pyrazines? So this is where it really comes to fore. So as this is so far north, so much further north than Bordeaux, you can imagine the pyrazines are even stronger here in Loire Valley. So you get a lot of that green vegetal flavor with the wine, which delivers really fresh styles. So while in Bordeaux, it kind of makes it not great, in Loire, this is exactly what makes it great. These pyrazines make the wine absolutely spectacular. So you got those blueberries and then kind of paired with the green bell peppers. So it's a really interesting, really savory styles of wine. Perfect for food, especially lighter stuff. Cabernet Franc from Loire Valley, definitely chill it a little bit. 15 degrees is perfect for it. Just a beautiful wine. You'll also find a grape called Groyot in this kind of region. Most of the time it will be used for the rosé, which is okay. It's not bad actually. They got some Pinot Noir as well, mainly in the regions of Touraine and Sancerre. And then kind of the most important grape of Loire Valley in terms of England, I guess, at least, is the Sauvignon Blanc, which is most famously grown in Sancerre and Puy-Fumé. So Sancerre is this village on the picture behind. It sits on top, really beautiful, really quaint village. And kind of all of the surrounding villages make the appellation of Sancerre very interesting. Let me just briefly talk about the Loire Icons, and then I'll explain why I left Loire Valley for last. So the most important guys in Sancerre and Puy-Fumé kind of will be Alphonse Melot, François Cotta, Henri Bourgeois, which I was lucky enough to stay with, and Vacheron. And then for Chenin, you get Dumenuet and Chateau de Fel. Now, why I kept Loire Valley till the end is because I wanted to talk about this guy. So this guy is Didier Dagueneau. So he is, again, like I said about the top producers, there are a little bit of crazy guys, and as you can see on the picture, doesn't look very normal, does he? So Didier Dagueneau was this great guy that used to race sidecars. So he was racing on bikes. He was 20 years old or something, and he had two very serious crashes. So he said, okay, I'm probably gonna die, so I might have to do something else about my life. I have to do something else about my career. So because he lived in Puy-Fumé, that's where his family from, and he always had a score to settle with his family. He said, my family makes wine, but their wine is shit, so I'm gonna open my own winery and I'm gonna make the best wine ever. And he said this when he had zero experience about wine. He had 1 year, 1 vintage on his belt, and he said, I'm gonna make the best wines ever. So first of all, as you can see, he's a bit of a hippie as well. He even changed the name of the street that his house is on to Ernesto Che Guevara. So that tells you a lot about him and his thinking. But he was actually, in spite of looking like a hippie, he was one of the biggest perfectionists ever. His barrels were measured with tapes that they were exactly aligned, perfectly aligned. Everything is tip-top. There was nothing out of place. He was basically not afraid to experiment. So he was the first guy to bring biodynamics into Loire Valley. Nobody else was doing it. He was using his horse, the guy in the picture, to plow the vineyards and do everything there. And then 4 years later, he said, actually, this doesn't work for me. So he stopped using biodynamics. So he only did it for a few years, saw what's good, and kicked out everything that wasn't good. Then he played around with natural wine, so he didn't use any sulfur, and he gave up on that because he said the wines are shit. Then, I mean, this is him. This is what he does. He keeps experimenting, he keeps doing new things to make some of the most amazing wines. And he constantly fought with all of the neighbors, everybody in the appellation next to him. He was telling them they're shit, they're rubbish. They should learn from him, or they should respect the terroir. They should think about the terroir. And he is the guy that put Puy-Fumé and Sancerre later on the map of serious winemaking. Now, he even made one of the most spectacular wines. So to this day, the best wine I've ever had, called Asteroid. It is a wine that he makes insanely small quantities of. There is maybe 600 bottles a year of that wine. So if you actually get it, it's good luck with that. But it is the best Sauvignon Blanc, not just the best Sauvignon Blanc, the best wine I've ever had. It is the most aromatic, most expressive thing I've ever tried in my life. It has just, the thing about it was that the wine comes in layers of flavor. So whereas with most wine, you will sniff the wine and you will taste, okay, I get passion fruit, I get gooseberry, I get this and that. With him, it was like you smell the wine and all you smell is passion fruit. And then that disappears and gooseberry comes. And it's just kind of like in waves, and they're very precise and very elegant, and they come on their own. It's like a little model show, like a catwalk. They come and showcase themselves. Some of them really absolutely amazing wine. And it comes from a very, very small vineyard. I think it's 18 rows that he has. And the funny thing about it is that it is Phylloxera free. So it's on Vitis Vinifera Wines. And he wanted to do this. So basically, before he walks into the vineyard, he changed his shoes. So he didn't bring the disease with him by any chance. So like I said, very meticulous, and he made it happen. He even invented his way of how to, so Sauvignon Blanc was always known to be a fresh, light wine in Sancerre and Puy-Fumé, but he added this aging on lees, or not aging on lees, but mixing the lees in the barrel. And he learned from other people and he didn't like how they did it. So he invented his own technique. And when he brought in workers into his winery, he basically made a barrel, and the barrel was glass on two sides, because the guys told him, I mean, you literally just mix the lees. And he said, no. And he showed them in the barrel, because it had the windows, basically. You could see inside what was happening, how he wants it done. So like I said, perfectionist, crazy, insane guy. Now, unfortunately, he passed away in 2008 as he was an adrenaline junkie. He crashed with a very light airplane, which was very sad news for the world of wine. But yeah, I had the privilege of having one of the wines still made by him. These days, he has his son, Benjamin, that makes the wines from him. So if you do ever get a chance to drink anything from the domain, even the son is very talented, very, very good winemaking. But yeah, that's why I wanted to finish off today on him. That's why I wanted to keep Loire Valley to the end, because he was kind of the reason that I wanted to make this into today. All right. And that's it for me for today. It was a little bit rushed, I know, I'm sorry about that, but like I said, we just need to kind of try to cover as much as possible in a relatively limited time. So yeah, Do you guys have any questions? Anything I should have mentioned, didn't mention, should have mentioned, whatever? All right. So that's it for today then. I will see you guys on Tuesday, and we are conquering the new world next week. And that's it. Hope you have a good weekend. Watch some of the movies. Namely, try the Bottle Shock, like I said, because we're gonna talk about that. Okay. I'm gonna stick around for a few more minutes. If anybody has any questions, anything follow up. The rest of you, thank you very much, and we'll see you around.
Thank you.
Thank you.